Good morning, Oceanside. How are we doing? I told Mike this morning I'd prep something flexible because we weren't really sure how we were going to do this or what it was going to be. And I said, guys, take your time, spend your time up there. And yeah, it's awesome. You guys are the parents of this house. And we had breakfast on Thursday morning, and we've been meeting lots and lots over the last few years. And there's been lots of these sweet times. But this week, as I was thinking about this Sunday, and you know how you're making plans and you're just like, you're sort of thinking about the logistics around everything. And then you get a little closer to the event, and it's the emotion of what's actually happening starts to hit you in different ways. And of course, leading a church or leading the team that leads the church is a big thing. It's a weighty thing. But the thing that hit me this week is that none of us would have this place without these two sitting in the front row here this morning. You know, in 1994, right? These guys, 97, bad at math, but it's not a qualification for being a pastor, so we're all good. 1997, these guys heard the call of God, came from a very comfortable life in South Africa where they had influence, where they had capability, where they had family, where they had relationships, where their kids had friends, where they had schools, where they had a support system. And they came to, you know, another hemisphere on the other side of the planet to a town that, you know, we laugh about because you can't pronounce it when you first come here. And I think about all the things that me and Camilla have had the privilege to do here. We've had our kids here. Our best relationships, our most significant relationships have all come out of this church. And then God has had the ability to work in our lives through this church as well. And I just think none of that would have happened without you guys. I was meeting with the other pastors of the churches in Nanaimo, and there's a lot of great churches in Nanaimo. Just the only issue is that I just don't want to be at any of them, except for this one. When me and Camilla walked into this place in, I think, 2011, just after we got married, we were attending another church, and we were just like, it's just not quite right. There's something that's sitting with us. We want to feel the fire, feel something burn within us when we sit in a meeting. And I remember it was at the old gymnasium. I think BJ was leading worship, and I think Mike was preaching that Sunday. And we walked in, and we honestly knew within the first 30 seconds of the service that this was going to be the place where we were going to be. We didn't have to look and do all the research. We had the privilege of meeting some leaders in the weeks following that, but we knew that God had brought us here for a reason. And for us, we've never thrust forward into leadership. We've never put up our hands. I like serving in the places that take me out of the spotlight most of the time. But these guys have just faithfully brought us through and called out in us what they've seen before we have seen it, perhaps over ourselves in certain ways. And I just want to thank you guys. I was thinking about the inheritance that we, just my family, owes to Mike and Deborah and their kids for coming here and planting this church. And we're 25 years into this church, and we'll celebrate that in September, the 25th anniversary of these guys coming and just starting a simple work of God in their house. But if I extrapolate the significance of this church just for my family, and I think about the thousands that have come through this church in the last 25 years, you guys honestly have no idea the spiritual inheritance that it has been in this city and throughout this city because of what you guys have done. When Mike and Debs came, they didn't know a single Christian in Canada. I think that's the line you use, right? Obviously knew there were Christians here. They're working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and just starting faithfully saying, maybe we can start a home group in our home and invite the neighbors along the street and just see what happens. And they started, Michelle, Byron, and Gareth was their first part of the congregation. We hear all sorts of funny stories about tithing and giving and all this other stuff and preaching and all this stuff, but yeah, they never gave any money. I just want to say to you guys as well, the kids, Michelle, we bumped into each other earlier this week, and I was just saying the sacrifice that you guys made, even as kids, to come to this country, to plant, to not know anybody, to be part of their parents doing a weird thing in the city and having to go to school with that, and having, you guys are an amazing, amazing blessing. And you guys are part of the inheritance that your parents planted in this place. I don't know where myself or Camilla would be. I don't know where any of us would be. Obviously, God's working in different ways throughout the city, but none of us know quite where we would be without this couple. I think you can agree. As I was thinking about verses this morning of just the significance, again, thinking about what Mike and Debs have done, I was thinking about Hebrews 1:11. And in Hebrews 11, there's this giant list of heroes of the faith, of people who stepped out, who heard God, who trusted that God was bigger than themselves. And in Hebrews 11, the writer, who we don't quite know who it is, he says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." And as I think about this couple, I think about there's no truer verse than what established this couple in this church than that. If I think about you, Deborah, you're a woman who is covered in hope. I always say there's no prayer meeting like a Deborah Graves prayer meeting, because when she comes to a prayer meeting, there is this bubble-up, joyous hope that enters into the room and enters into the believers who are there gathered together. You can be having the most mundane meeting, and then Deborah arrives, usually late, which is a good thing, because she establishes herself quickly, and the joy of the Lord quickly comes into that place. We know that there's been many dark seasons through planting this church and doing different things, through sicknesses, illnesses. Those who you are new to this church, in fact, we came to this church after all those things, after transplants and different things. But I love the stubborn hope that this couple has. And again, we might think that's stubbornness, we might just think that's happiness, but the Bible calls it faith. The other thing is that this couple has from this verse is just assurance. They know that they know that they know that they were called to plant here. And through many trials, both physically, externally, other things, they've known that they've known that they've known to stick it out through thick and thin. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. And these aren't just happy people who have been leading a happy prayer meeting in a happy church, but that happiness and that joy and that hope has transcended every adversary and has come to be assurance. And lastly, these guys have the conviction of things that are not seen in the natural yet. And that's what it takes to plant a church. That's what it takes to establish this thing. There's different kinds of leaders. There's different kinds of season in a church. But this church would not be here today without a couple that had assurance, that had hope, that had the conviction to see this thing through. And I just want to thank you for that. It's our privilege to try and continue that as much as possible in this church, along with the other leaders and along with all of us together as we continue plotting out this road. And you guys have been faithful, faithful ministers to us as well. I know we're not at the September thing, but I couldn't get away from these verses and just thinking about how they applied to this amazing family, the leaders of this mission. It says in 2 Corinthians 3, it talks about the Apostle Paul is talking about the group of believers there and what those believers mean to him. And he says this, writing to a group into a city, he says, "You yourselves are our letter of recommendation." And I just think this church, if anybody was trying to see, have Mike and Deb lived a faithful journey, just look at what God has done. Just go online and see the testimonies of what God has done. Just count the faces, looking at all the old pictures of the faces who have been through this thing and who have had lives changed by this couple. You guys stand before the living God with an amazing letter of recommendation. The Apostle Paul says, written on our hearts to be known and be read by all. And this church stands to this city and this nation about the good work that you have done here. And you show that you are a letter from Christ delivered by us, not written with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on the tablets of human hearts. Such is the confidence that we have through Christ towards God, not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything coming from us, but the sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant. And I love that you guys as well, if you spend time with this couple, again from the front, it can see like there's no better couple to lead this thing. There's no better couple to plant this thing and to establish this thing. When you spend time on one-on-one, you see the humanness of the leadership. You see the struggle. You see the wrestling of what God is doing. But this speaks to the faith of this couple that even despite they knew in their own ability that this could not happen in the natural, they knew that there was a God behind them that established them as the ministers of this work. The sufficiency to plant this church has come from them, but from God before that. And is not of the letter, it is the letter of the Spirit, and the Spirit gives life. And the third thing that I was just thinking about this morning is I was just thinking about what you guys have done. And again, thinking about your whole family, thinking about all the people who have been at Oceanside a lot longer than me and Camilla. There's many, many, many of you who have poured into this thing at great cost. I think Paul mentioned it, or someone mentioned it a few weeks ago, but in Luke 12, when Jesus is talking to his disciples, it says, "Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with treasure in heaven that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And I love that you guys, that there is no doubt from any of us here this morning that we can see where your heart lies, Mike and Deborah. You haven't sought gain for yourselves. You've never asked for anything, but you have sought to put people out in front of you, and you've sought to sow into this place. Your treasure is an eternal treasure, and we can all see it. And again, speaking before, I believe the inheritance that even though there's a few hundred of us gathered here this morning, it pales into comparison to the thousands and thousands, even on the ministry trips around the world that you guys have done. There is a spiritual inheritance waiting for you that you guys don't even know. And I want to say for us, me and Camilla, again, we've known about this plan for a while from when Brian knew, and it was this thing of Mike and Debs came to us and say, "Hey, if anything happens, we want you guys, and we just see you guys as taking over the church." And church, you've got to know that we've never prayed harder in our life for nothing to happen to Mike and Debs. I usually laugh at people when, I shouldn't say this, but I usually smirk when people pray for like traveling mercies and other things like that. It's because I'm like, traveling's pretty safe these days. There's not bandits and robbers waiting around every corner and things like this. But the covering that has been on this couple ever since that meeting, there has been intercession. There's been all this stuff. Yeah, keep it going. Yeah. But it just blew us away at every turn, even from when Paul asked us to help lead a connect group, to then it was youth group with Wes, and then you guys met with us to meet us onto eldership, and we just thought, why are you picking us? Pick someone with a few more gray hairs, why don't you? It's eldership. Shouldn't it look more elderly? And I just thank you, Lord. I thank you guys that you guys saw that over us, and we come into this role as humble people. I was thinking just as we're standing there with our kids is that whenever you're on the precipice of a life change, either you get married or you have a kid or you have a second kid, and well done Brett and Asia, they've had that kid on Tuesday and she's already here this morning. Chloe, listening to this, well done. But you realize how selfish you are in each of one of those transitions. Because in each one of those transitions, you realize that more is required of you. more laying down, more service, more sacrifice, as God calls us into servant leadership in marriage and in parenting and in church leadership as well. And I just thank you guys that nobody knows, not even we know, although we speculate, the sacrifices and the sacrificial leadership that you guys have led with. At the end of Hebrews 11 comes Hebrews 12, after listing off person after person after person. I was listening to someone this week and just reading up on that verses, and they were saying, you notice that with every person that was listed there, sometimes we think of faith as just this thing of just this belief in our heart, this thing that we know, that we have the faith that we know that we're going to be saved one day, we have faith in Jesus Christ. But in every person in that list in Hebrews 11, whether it was Moses or Samson or Joshua or Abraham or any one of them, it said they had the faith and then they did this. They had this and then they did this. They had this and then they established that. They had this and then they stepped into that. And I just thank you guys that this wouldn't be here if you just had the faith for it. Because faith without action doesn't count for much. But faith with action has established this. And in Hebrews 12, verse 1, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run the race with endurance, the race that is set out before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. I thank you guys for the race that you have run for us and for this church. And in September, church, as we head towards transition, it's more like a relay race than an individual race. This is a team sport with coaches, and we're all running and we're all passed the baton on at different levels and at different ways as we bring through the next generation. We're running in the same race, but we're on different parts of the track. For me, on my side, I feel like we're on a tremendously easier part of the track than you guys raced. You guys were racing on the mountains, the valleys, the ups, the downs, and I just thank you that we stand on your shoulders, this church. Obviously, we know that things will happen. It says that we run with endurance in this verse as well, and that is our goal before you as we stand as a couple before this church. We don't know when God will call us to pass on the baton to the next generation as well, but we know that this race is run with endurance. You overestimate what you can do in 1 year, but you significantly always underestimate what can happen in 5 or 10 years. And had these guys imagined where they could have been in 10, 25, or so many years. We're surrounded by witnesses, and we're also always looking to Jesus as we run this race. I was thinking, it's Father's Day. I know this isn't much of a Father's Day preach, but you guys will know that when you're teaching your kids a sport, or when you're teaching your kids, Zion had a bowling birthday party in recent weeks. I'm like, shoot, we've never taken him bowling. He's going to be terrible. Luckily there's bumpers and there's other things to help him with his birthday party that he's going to. But again, the one thing that I told him is just like, Zion, if you just hear one thing of knowing how to bowl, it's just to look at the pin of what you're trying to hit. Don't look at the ball. Don't look at your feet. Don't look at anybody else around you. Just fix your eyes on that pin at the end of the race. And it's so true whether we're teaching our kids soccer or football or anything. If you're teaching your kid how to defend or something, or how to get past the defender, you say, don't look at the defender's legs, look through his legs at where you want to go. And I think that's like us as we look to Jesus. And that's what you guys have modeled, constantly pushing us to Jesus, constantly not pointing to yourselves, but pointing to the Lord. And for us as well, as we stand before you, we want to point to Jesus. He is our goal. He is our objective. He is the finish line for all of us. And we love this church as well for what Mike and Deborah has built into its leadership team. I think one of the reasons we said yes was because of the way that they've built this eldership team. From Paul, from Nathan and Wes and the other extended leaders, our deacon team and all of our Connect group leaders, we look around the church to see the quality of the leadership that has been built here. It's an easy yes when we see the faces that are surrounding us, supporting us, knowing that God has, through Mike and Debs, built a strong team here into the future. They say the smartest leaders are the ones who bring people who are smarter than them into every which way. And I love that that is how the leadership works here at Oceanside. We're each gifted in individual ways, just like in marriage, where sometimes God gives you the opposite character, the opposite person of who you are, with love and unity and working together. It's to your advantage, and it's to our advantage here as a team that they've set us up in that way. Thank you, guys. If there's one area that I'd like to request prayer for in this time, it's obviously unity. There's so many different things, as you know, that would keep us going in this season. But as I was preparing in the last couple of weeks of just like, God, what are the hallmarks in this next season? What are the hallmarks as we walk this transition out? And he just brought to me 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7, where he says, "For we walk by faith and not by sight." Earlier in chapter 4, verse 18, it says, as we look not to the things that are seen, but we look to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And that is our mission before you here today, church, is that we and our rest of our eldership would lead with a vision that isn't seen in the natural, that isn't sometimes smart decisions when we look at the physical things that are happening, but they're God decisions. In 2 Kings, verse 6, I think we preached on this a couple years ago, it talks about Elijah, and there was this army surrounding Elijah. It said, "Behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city, and the servant of Elijah said, 'Alas, my master, what shall we do?' And he said, 'Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them.' And then Elijah prayed and said, 'O Lord, please open the eyes of this servant that he may see.' And so the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, there was a mountain full of horses and chariots of fire around Elijah." And that is us, church. In the natural, it doesn't make sense. In the natural, the opposition is greater. But as we know from the Bible, time and time again, that God has a different word for opposition, and it is opportunity instead. Every time there is opposition, every time there is a struggle, every time there is a mountain, every time there is a foothold to take, God sees it as an opportunity to make his name great once again. And every one of those faith-filled people in Hebrews 11 is a testament to the great God of him surrounding his people. Are the next 25 years going to be easier or tougher for the church? We don't know. We speculate. In different ways, it's probably true and false in different ways. But we know that the God who is for this church is greater than any opposing force, is greater than ourselves. His heart for the mission of this church is greater than us. But we would just pray and plead and fast that God gives us the vision to see where he wants us to go. That is how you can pray for the leadership of this church. In Romans 8:31, it says, "If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave himself for all of us, how will we not also with him graciously give us all things?" We know that again in John 16, verse 33, Jesus says to his disciples, "But take heart, I have overcome the world." Think about the time when Joshua went up into the land. We talked a little bit about Jericho and these other times, and Joshua went with the 12 spies, and they saw a land overflowing with milk and honey. And they came back, and the rest of them said, "It's way too difficult. The giants are too big. The obstacles are too massive. It's never going to work." And the people were distraught because they thought they should go back to Egypt, and it'd be better to be under slavery than it to go up and fight where God has taken them. And Joshua says this, after those other people didn't have faith for it. He says, if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. A land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of that land. Church, over the last few years, as we've thought about this, as we've dwelled at this, as we've not known the exact timing where God would call this transition into being, there's been plenty of times as we've been weighing up the sides of what's going to happen and what's going to be difficult. But I can stand before you here, church, this morning that I know that the God that has rescued me personally time and time before will keep on rescuing this church and delivering it into its inheritance. There is no one, nothing that can keep God from pouring his kingdom on faithful servants. And it's our mission to ask God to open our eyes, to ask for the strength to be faithful, to be humble in our own wisdom, and to step forth into what he has already overcome. The other thing of why we're happy is because this couple aren't going anywhere. Again, Mike mentioned it. These guys are sticking around. They thought about planting down in Duncan. Have you guys? No. Seriously though, Mike 6 months ago is like, if we're called to plant another church, we'll do it. I'm like, your wife isn't sitting next to you right now, and you'd be happy about that. No. I just love that, the heart of Mike, as he just says, whatever God has got, there is no retirement in the kingdom. Someone said this to me as we were talking about this with some voices outside the church. And he says, the person said this, is like, the office changes, the job changes, the role might change, but the calling and the gifting is never taken away. In Romans 11:29, it says, for the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. And whatever happens, obviously, when we head towards September, and that's the time when we'll hand this thing over. But the calling and the gifting on this couple doesn't change. And so we are thrilled to say that they're going to stay on staff with us here at the church, and they are going to pour in to the pastoral team. Although not on eldership, just to let me establish my feet here with the team and to take on that governing role, we would be fools not to use this couple. And I want to say to you guys, after maybe giving them a little bit of a break, but as they come back in, pour into this couple. Pour into these guys. If you've got an issue in your marriage, go to these guys. If you've got an issue in your workplace, go to these guys. If you're struggling, if anything, I have never seen a bigger pastoral heart than on these people. And you can just look, and maybe we'll hear some of the stories of the testimonies of what God has done through this church under their leadership. And it's that pastoral heart that isn't going away at this point. Although the baton is being passed on, and we'll continue to lead the eldership with Paul, Nathan, and Wes, these guys are still a valuable resource. They'll stay on the apostolic team as well. The calling and the mission of that part of their lives has not changed. Mike and Deb, it's been a privilege to come with you on trips to different places. And it's been amazing to see the authority, and the only way to say it is the God-given gift on your lives for that ministry as well. To be able to see into leadership issues, to be able to see past what people are just putting up on the surface, and to give the life that God wants to pour into those places. And we're thrilled to still enable that as they serve on the NCMI team. We don't know what we'll call these guys just yet. We said founding pastors or something like that. We don't know. We got time to figure it out. I think the nickname that Debs has at home is Gaga, based from all the grandkids. And we were talking about that on Thursday morning as well, and just how, you're the parent of a ministry at some point, and now me and Camilla get to parent this church along with the other members of that team. But these guys get to step into a much more fun role, which is the grandparents of the church. We love our grandparents so much, Camilla's parents, that we live right next to them. And right next to them is our great-grandparents of the children as well. We love grandparents, and if you're a parent who's around your grandparents, you know what an amazing thing it is for your kids to have a relationship with the grandparents. There's a steadiness. There's an encouragement. Many times their parents have come to us and say, we can see you're stressing about this thing. Just don't worry. Give them this. Do this. This is a better way to do it. And we are thrilled to have that input. Your phone is going to be ringing off the hook as we ask, how the heck do we discipline this one? No, just kidding. The other thing about being a grandparent is you get to do all the fun things. You get to have all the candy. You get to supply all the sugar. And the parents get to clean up all the poop and other things like that. But we're thrilled that we get to lead this thing with that support under us. And it would be terrifying if you guys were somewhere else or had moved on or this other thing, but to knowing that the grandparents of this ministry, who love it more than us, who love the people more than us, are still here, are still loving, and are still called and gifted for the ministry that is coming at this church. That's about it for what I have to share with you this morning here, church. I wasn't sure how this was gonna play out in just how things different worked. And just to let you guys know as well that on the 10th of September, it's a Saturday night. If you have your phones out, put it in the calendar. We are gonna throw a massive party on the 10th of September, Saturday night, in this place for the 25th year anniversary of this church. It's a little late, but it's the same year. It's perfect. When was that first guest invited to church there? No. And then the day after, when Ty is with us up from the States, the transition will happen there as well. So just thank you for that. And yeah. Is there anything you want to add, hon? Yeah. Okay.
Well, hello. I was really happy being the silent partner. As I stand up here, I'm undone. I'm so thankful and honored and feel totally unworthy of the call. But I'm so thankful for the team that we have. Mike and Debs that are here. Andy, my husband, of course, and everyone in this room, and the people that aren't in this room watching on TV, and people that aren't in this congregation and that support us. And I am overwhelmed, and I am so thankful for what's ahead. We are all called to so much more. This isn't just a transition for Andy and I and the team. It's a beautiful transition for all of you as well. And I am so excited what is going to flourish out of that.
Awesome. Thank you, church.